Okay, we're Wise Heart by Jack Kornfield. We are starting part 2, Mindfulness, the Great Medicine. And this is chapter 7 of the book, The Liberating Power of Mindfulness. I'm really looking forward to this chapter. Quote by Buddha: "My friends, it is through the establishment of the lovely clarity of mindfulness that you can let go of grasping after past and future, overcome attachment and grief, abandon all clinging and anxiety, and awaken an unshakable freedom of heart here and now." By Digha Nikaya, establish a liberating clarity of mindfulness of the body, of the feelings, of the mind, and of the Dharma. In myths from around the world, men and women have searched for an elixir that will bring protection from suffering. Buddhist psychology's answer is mindfulness. How does mindfulness work? Let me illustrate with a story. If you've ever seen the film Gorillas in the Mist, you know about Dian Fossey, the courageous field biologist who befriended a tribe of gorillas. Fossey had gone to Africa to continue the work of her mentor, George Schaller, a renowned primatologist who had collected more intimate information about gorilla life than any scientist before him. When his colleagues asked how he was able to learn so much about these shy and elusive creatures, he attributed it to one simple thing: he didn't carry a gun. Previous generations of biologists had entered the territory of these huge animals with the assumption that they were dangerous. So the scientists came with an aggressive spirit, large rifles in hand. The gorillas could sense the danger around these rifle-bearing men and kept a far distance. By contrast, Schaller and later Fossey entered their territory without weapons. They had to move slowly, gently, and above all respectfully toward these creatures. In time, sensing the benevolence of these humans, the gorillas allowed them to come among them and learn their ways. Sitting still hour after hour with careful, patient attention, Fossey finally understood what she saw: a whole new world of tribal and family relationships, unique personalities, habits, and communication. As the African American sage George Washington Carver explained, anything will give up its secrets if you love it enough. Mindfulness is attention. It is a non-judging and respectful awareness. Unfortunately, much of the time we don't attend in this way. Instead, we continually react, judging whether we like, dislike, or can ignore what is happening. We evaluate ourselves and others with a stream of expectations, commentary, and criticism. When people initially come to a meditation class to train in mindfulness, they hope to become calm and peaceful. Usually they are in for a big shock. The first hour of mindfulness meditation reveals its opposite, bringing an unseen stream of evaluation and judgment into stark relief. As the minutes pass, we may cycle between agitation and boredom. We hear a door slam and wish for quiet. Our knees hurt and we try to avoid the pain. We wish we had a better cushion. We can't feel our breath and we get frustrated. We notice our mind won't stop planning and we feel like a failure. Then we remember someone we're angry at and get upset. And if we notice how many judgments there are, we feel proud of ourselves for noticing. But like George Schaller, we can put aside these weapons of judgment. We can become mindful. When we are mindful, it is as if we can bow to our experience without judgment or expectation. Mindfulness, declared the Buddha, is all helpful. Here is a seventh principle of Buddhist psychology. Mindful attention to any experience is liberating. Mindfulness brings perspective, balance, and freedom. Paracelsus, the master healer of the Middle Ages, once declared, "The physician should speak of that which is invisible. What is visible should belong to his knowledge, and he should recognize illness, just as anyone who is not a physician can recognize illness from the symptoms. But this is far from what makes a physician. He becomes a physician only when he also knows that which is unnamed, invisible, and immaterial, yet has its effects." So does mindfulness open us to that which is unseen in our experience. Peter, a middle-aged computer designer, came to a meditation retreat looking for relief. He was coping with a recently failed business, a shaky marriage, and a sick mother. But meditation quickly became agony. The anger and disappointment that pervaded his current situation rose in the quiet room to fill his mind. His attempts to quiet himself by sensing his breath felt hopeless, and his attention repeatedly bounced away from his body like a tennis ball. Then it got worse. A restless woman seated nearby began to cough loudly and frequently. She began to fidget and move and cough more as the first day wore on. Peter, who was struggling just to be with his own sorrow, became frustrated, angry, and as she continued coughing, enraged. He sought my co-teacher, Deborah Chamberlain Taylor, and insisted that meditation was the wrong approach for him and he needed to leave. She asked Peter to close his eyes and mindfully notice the state of his body. It was filled with tension, hurting. With Deborah's help, he found he could hold the tension and hurt with a more accepting and kind attention. He breathed, relaxed a little, and recognized that the medicine he needed was nothing other than to understand his own pain. The next instruction he was given was simple: to keep a gentle mindfulness on his body as he sat and to notice whatever happened. When he returned to the meditation hall, after only a few minutes, his fidgety neighbor began a long coughing spell. With each cough, Peter felt his own muscles clench and his breath stop. Now he became more curious, interested in how his body was reacting. He began to notice that hearing each cough produced an internal clenching and a wave of anger, which subsided as he practiced relaxing between the spells. Finally, at the end of the sitting period, he got up to walk down to the lunchroom. As he arrived, he noticed his tormentor, the cougher, in the line ahead of him. Immediately, he noticed how, just seeing her, his stomach clenched and his breath stopped. Again, he relaxed. When he returned to the meditation hall after lunch, he checked to see what time his name was listed for a private interview with his teacher. Farther down the same list, he read the restless woman's name. Just seeing her name made his stomach clench and his breath tighten. Since he was still paying attention, he was able to relax again. He realized that his body had become a mirror, and that his mindfulness was showing him both the cause and the cure of his suffering, recognizing tension in the mind and consciously relaxing that tension. As the retreat went on, his attention grew more precise. He noticed that his own anxious and angry thoughts about his family and business problems could trigger the same clenching and tightening as the woman's cough. He had always tried to have things under control. Now that his life had proved out of control, the habits of anger, blame, and judgment were tying him in knots. With each reaction, he could feel the knots arise. After each one, he would pause mindfully and bring in a touch of ease. He began to trust mindfulness. By the close of the retreat, he was grateful to the restless woman near him. He wanted to thank her for her teaching. With mindfulness, Peter found relief. He also discovered the benefit of curiosity and openness, what Shunryu Suzuki famously called beginner's mind. As he explains, we pay attention with respect and interest, not in order to manipulate, but to understand what is true. And seeing what is true, the heart becomes free. Mindfulness, which is to say patient, receptive, non-judging awareness, is important in Western psychotherapy as well. From the even hovering attention that Freud recommended to psychoanalysts to the unconditional positive regard of Carl Rogers and other humanistic psychologists to the present-centered awareness of Gestalt, this open form of awareness is seen as a primary healing tool. Since 1980, nearly 1,000 scientific papers have documented the effectiveness of mindfulness, often studying Western trainings that are based on a Buddhist approach. As an important distinction to make, however, is that while Western psychology has focused primarily on the mindfulness of the therapist, Buddhist psychology asserts that the very foundation of well-being is a systematic training of mindfulness in the student. With mindfulness, understanding unfolds naturally. As Buddhist teacher Sharon Salzberg quipped one day, "It's easy to teach. All you have to do is ask if they're being mindful." Mindfulness as fearless presence. The art of living is neither careless drifting on the one hand nor fearful clinging on the other. It consists in being sensitive to each moment, in regarding it as utterly new and unique, in having the mind open and wholly receptive. Alan Watts. Sitting mindfully with our sorrows and fears or with those of another is an act of courage. It is not easy. Marge believed that confronting her rage might kill her. Jorge's son's cystic fibrosis brought terrifying images of wheelchairs and early death. Perry was afraid to face his infidelities and sexual peculiarities. Jerry could hardly bear to think of the carnage he had seen during his work in Bosnia. For Angela, facing the recurrence of her cancer meant facing death. With patience and courage, each of these people gradually learned how to sit firmly on the earth and sense the contraction and trembling of their body without running away. They learned how to feel the floods of emotions, fear, grief, and rage, and to allow them to slowly release with mindfulness. They learned to see the endless mental stories that repeat over and over, and with the resources of mindfulness and compassion, to let them go and relax, to steady the mind and return to the present. Sometimes we forget that the Buddha too had fears. How would it be if in the dark of the month, with no moon, I were to enter the most strange and frightening places, near tombs and in the thick of the forest, that I might come to understand fear and terror? In doing so, a wild animal would approach or the wind rustle the leaves, and I would think, perhaps the fear and terror now comes. And being resolved to dispel the hold of that fear and terror, I remained in whatever posture it arose, sitting or standing, walking or lying down. I did not change until I had faced that fear and terror in that very posture, until I was free of its hold upon me. And having this thought, I did so. By facing the fear and terror, I became free. In the traditional training at Ajahn Chah's forest monastery, we were sent to sit alone in the forest at night, practicing the meditations on death. Stories of monks who had encountered tigers and other wild animals helped keep us alert. There were many snakes, including cobras. At Ajahn Buddhadasa's forest monastery, we were taught to tap our walking sticks on the paths at night so the snakes would hear us and move out of the way. At another monastery, I periodically sat all night at the charnel grounds. Every few weeks, a body was brought for cremation. After the lighting of the funeral pyre and the chanting, most people would leave, with only monks remaining to tend the fire in the dark forest. Finally, one monk would be left alone to sit there until dawn, contemplating death. Not everyone did these practices, but I was a young man looking for initiation, eager to prove myself, so I gravitated toward these difficulties. As it turned out, sitting in the dark forest with its tigers and snakes was easier than sitting with my inner demons. My insecurity, loneliness, shame, and boredom came up, along with all my frustrations and hurts. Sitting with these took more courage than sitting at the charnel grounds. Little by little, I learned to face them with mindfulness, to make a clearing within the dark woods of my own heart. Mindfulness does not reject experience. It lets experience be the teacher. One Buddhist practitioner with severe asthma learned to bring a mindful attention to his breath. By becoming aware of the stress in his body and being patient as the muscles in his throat and chest relaxed, he was able to limit his attacks. Another man undergoing cancer treatment used mindfulness to quell his fear of pain and added loving kindness for his body as a complement to his chemotherapy. Through mindfulness, a local politician learned not to be discouraged by his attackers. A frazzled single mother of preschoolers used mindfulness to acknowledge her own tension and feeling of being overwhelmed, opening the space to become more respectful of herself and her boys. Each of these practitioners learned to trust mindfulness as they entered the difficulties in their lives. Like the Buddha in the thick of the forest, they found healing and freedom. 4 principles for mindful transformation. Learning takes place only in a mind that is innocent and vulnerable. In many Western mindfulness retreats, the 4 principles for mindful transformation are taught with the acronym RAIN: recognition, acceptance, investigation, and non-identification. The Zen poets tell us that the rain falls equally on all things, and like the nourishment of our outer rain, the inner principles of rain can transform our difficulties. Recognition is the first principle of transformation. When we are stuck in our life, we must begin with a willingness to see what is so. It is as if someone were to ask us gently, "Hey, what is really happening now?" Do we reply brusquely, "Nothing," or do we pause and acknowledge the reality of our experience here and now? With recognition, we step out of denial. Denial undermines our freedom. The diabetic who denies his body's illness is not free. Neither is the driven, stressed-out executive who denies the cost of her lifestyle, or the self-critical would-be painter who denies his love of making art. The society that denies its poverty and injustice has lost a part of its freedom as well. If we deny our dissatisfaction, our anger, our pain, our ambition, we will suffer. If we deny our values, our beliefs, our longings, or our goodness, we will suffer. There is a powerful opening that comes whenever we truly recognize what is so. The emergence and blossoming of understanding, love, and intelligence has nothing to do with any outer tradition. It happens completely on its own when a human being questions, wonders, listens, and looks without getting stuck in fear. When self-concern is quiet, in abeyance, heaven and earth are open. With recognition, our awareness becomes like the dignified host. We name and inwardly bow to our experience. Ah, sorrow, and now excitement. Yes, conflict, and yes, tension. Oh, now pain. Yes, and now the judging mind. Recognition moves us from delusion and ignorance toward freedom. We can light a lamp in the darkness, says the Buddha. We can see what is so. Acceptance is the next principle of transformation. Acceptance allows us to relax and open to the facts before us. It is necessary because with recognition there can come a subtle aversion, a resistance, a wish it weren't so. Acceptance does not mean that we cannot work to improve things, but just now, this is what is so. Zen Buddhists say if you understand, things are just as they are, and if you don't understand, things are still just as they are. Acceptance is not passivity. It is a courageous step in the process of transformation. Trouble? Life is trouble. Only death is nice, Zorba the Greek declares. To live is to roll up your sleeves and embrace trouble. Acceptance is a willing movement of the heart to include whatever is before it. This too, as individuals, we have to start with the reality of our own suffering. As a society, we have to start with the reality of collective suffering, of injustice, racism, greed, and hate. We can only transform the world as we learn to transform ourselves. As Carl Jung once remarked, perhaps I myself am the enemy who must be loved. With acceptance and respect, problems that seem intractable often become workable. A man began to give large doses of cod liver oil to his Doberman because he had been told that the stuff was good for dogs. Each day he would hold the head of the protesting dog between his knees, force its jaws open, and pour the liquid down its throat. One day the dog broke loose and spilled the fish oil on the floor. Then, to the man's great surprise, it returned to lick the puddle. That is when he discovered that what the dog had been fighting was not the oil, but the forceful way that it was being administered. With acceptance and respect, surprising transformations can occur. Investigation, the third principle, follows from recognition and acceptance. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh calls this seeing deeply. In recognition and acceptance, we recognize our dilemma and accept the truth of the whole situation. Then we must investigate more fully. Whenever we are stuck, it is because we have not looked deeply enough into the nature of the experience. As we undertake investigation, we focus on the four critical areas of experience: body, feelings, mind, and dharma. These are called the four foundations of mindfulness, and in the next 4 chapters, we will examine them in detail. For now, here is a simple overview: body, feelings, mind, and dharma. When we're investigating a difficulty and something's cooking inside, we want first to become aware of what's happening in our body. Can we locate where our difficulties are held? Sometimes we find heat, contraction, hardness, or vibration. Sometimes we notice throbbing, numbness, a certain shape and color. Are we meeting this area with resistance or with mindfulness? What happens if we hold these sensations with mindfulness? Do they open? Are there other layers? Is there a center? Do they intensify, move, expand, change, repeat, dissolve, or transform? Next, we need to investigate what feelings are part of this difficulty. Is the primary feeling tone pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? Are we meeting this feeling with mindfulness, and what are the secondary feelings associated with it? Often we discover a constellation of feelings. A man remembering his divorce may feel sadness, anger, jealousy, loss, fear, and loneliness. A woman who was unable to help her addicted nephew can feel longing, aversion, guilt, desire, emptiness, and unworthiness. With mindfulness, each feeling is recognized and accepted. We investigate whether it is pleasant or painful, contracted or relaxed, tense or sad. We notice where we feel the emotion in our body and what happens to it as it is held in awareness. Looking next into the mind, we ask what thoughts and images are associated with this difficulty. We become aware of all the stories, judgments, and beliefs we are holding. When we look more closely, we often discover that some of them are one-sided, fixed points of view, or outmoded habitual perspectives. We see that they are only stories. With mindfulness, we loosen their hold on us. We cling less to them. The fourth foundation of mindfulness is the Dharma. Dharma is an important and multifaceted word. It can mean the teachings and the path of Buddhism. It can mean the truth, and in this case, it can also mean the elements and patterns that make up experience. Investigating the Dharma, we look into the principles and laws that are operating. Is the experience actually as solid as it appears? Is it unchanging, or is it impermanent, moving, shifting, recreating itself? Does the difficulty expand or contract the space in our own mind? Is it under our control, or does it seem to have a life of its own? We notice if it is self-constructed. We investigate whether we are clinging to it, resisting it, or simply letting it be. We see whether our relationship to it is a source of suffering or happiness. And finally, we notice how much we identify with it. This leads us back to rain and to the principle of non identification. Non identification means that we stop taking the experience as me or mine. We see how our identification creates dependence, anxiety, and inauthenticity. In practicing non identification, we inquire of every state, experience, and story: is this who I really am? We see the tentativeness of this identity. Then we are free to let go and rest in awareness itself. This is the culmination of releasing difficulty through rain. One Buddhist practitioner, Duane, identified himself as a failure. His life had many disappointments, and after a few years of Buddhist practice, he was disappointed by his meditation too. Yes, he had become somewhat calmer, but he was still plagued by unrelenting critical thoughts and self judgments, leftovers from a harsh and painful past. He identified with these thoughts in his wounded history. Even the practice of compassion for himself brought little relief. Then, during a 10-day mindfulness retreat, he was inspired by the teachings of non identification. He was especially touched by the account of the Buddha, who, on the night of his enlightenment, faced his own demons in the form of the armies and temptations of Mara. Duane decided to stay up all night and directly face his own demons. For many hours, he tried to be mindful of his breath and body. In between sittings, he took periods of walking meditation. At each sitting, he was washed over by familiar waves of sleepiness, bodily pains, and critical thoughts. Then he began to notice that each changing experience was met by one common element: awareness itself. Late one night, he had an aha moment. He realized that awareness was not affected by any of these experiences, that it was open and untouched, like space itself. All his struggles, all the painful feelings and thoughts came and went without the slightest disturbance to awareness itself. Awareness became his refuge. Duane decided to test his realization. The meditation hall was empty, so he rolled on the floor. Awareness just noticed. He stood up, shouted, laughed, made funny animal noises. Awareness just noticed. He ran around the room, lay down quietly, went outside to the edge of the forest, picked up a stone and threw it, jumped up and down, laughed, came back, and sat. Awareness just noticed it all. Finding this, he felt free. He watched the sun rise softly over the hills. Then he went back to sleep for a time, and when he reawakened, his day was full of joy. Even when his doubts came back, awareness just noticed. Like the rain, his awareness allowed all things equally. It would be too rosy to end this story here. Later in the retreat, Duane again fell into periods of doubt, self-judgment, and depression. But now, even in the middle of it, he could recognize that it was just doubt, just judgment, just depression. He could not take it fully as his identity anymore. Awareness noticed this too and was silent and free. The fruits of non-identification. Buddhist psychology calls non-identification the abode of awakening, the end of clinging, true peace, nirvana. Without identification, we can respectfully care for ourselves and others, yet we are no longer bound by the fears and illusions of the small sense of self. Does non-identification really work in the toughest situations? Mahagasananda embodied it for 15 years as he walked through Cambodia's battle zones teaching peace. In the same spirit, here's a story by a police officer that I found in Ram Dass and Paul Gorman's book, How Can I Help? Now, there are two theories about crime and how to deal with it. Anti-crime guys say you have to think like a criminal, and some police learn that so well they get a kind of criminal mentality themselves. How I'm working with it is really pretty different. I'm a peace officer. I see that man is essentially pure and innocent and one of good nature. Now, it's interesting how this works. I had arrested a very angry man who singled me out for real animosity. When I had to take him to a paddy wagon, he spit in my face. That was something. And he went after me with a chair. We handcuffed him and put him in the truck. Well, on the way, I just had to get past this picture of things, and again I affirmed to myself, this guy and I are brothers in love. When I got to the station, I was moved spontaneously to say, look, if I've done anything to offend you, I apologize. The paddy wagon driver looked at me as if I was totally nuts. The next day, I had to take him from where he'd been housed overnight to criminal court. When I picked him up, I thought, well, if you trust this vision, you're not going to have to handcuff him. And I didn't. We got to a spot in the middle of the corridor, which was the place where he'd have jumped me if he had that intention, and he stopped suddenly. So did I. Then he said, I thought about what you said yesterday, and I want to apologize. I just felt this deep appreciation. Turned out on his rap sheet, he'd done a lot of time in a couple of bad prisons and had trouble with some harsh guards. I symbolized something, and I saw that turn around, saw a kind of healing, I believe. Mindfulness and fearless presence bring true protection. When we meet the world with recognition, acceptance, investigation, and non identification, we discover that wherever we are, freedom is possible, just as the rain falls on and nurtures all things equally. Practice. Establishing a daily meditation. First, select a suitable place for your regular meditation. Put a meditation cushion or chair there for your use and add any books or images that help make it feel like a sacred and peaceful space. Select a regular time for practice that suits your schedule and temperament. If you are a morning person, experiment with a sitting before breakfast. If evening fits your temperament or schedule better, try that first. Begin with sitting 10 or 20 minutes at a time. Later, you can sit longer or more frequently. Daily meditation can become like bathing or toothbrushing. It can bring a regular cleansing and calming to your heart and mind. Whether you're on a chair or cushion, sit erect without being rigid. Let your body be firmly planted on the earth, your hands resting easily, your heart soft, your eyes closed gently. Sense your body and soften any obvious tension. Let go of any habitual thoughts or plans. Now bring your attention to feel the sensations of your breathing. Take a few deep breaths to sense where you can feel the breath most easily, as coolness or tingling in the nostrils or throat, or as movement of the chest, or as rise and fall of the belly. Now let your breath be natural. Feel the sensations of each breath very carefully, relaxing into each breath as you feel it, noticing how the soft sensations of breathing come and go without effort. After a few breaths, your attention will probably wander. No matter how long or short a time you have been away, gently come back again to the breath. Before you return, you can mindfully acknowledge where you have gone with a soft word in the back of your mind, such as thinking, wandering, hearing, itching. After silently naming where your attention has been, relax and gently return to feel the next breath. As your meditation develops, you can become more fully mindful of the places where your attention wanders. When strong feelings, emotions, sensations, or thoughts carry you away from the breath, receive them with the same mindful noticing you give to the breath. Acknowledge them and name them gently. When they pass, return to the breath. Or if you are just beginning or want to become steadier, one word of acknowledgement and a return to breath is fine. As you sit with the breath, let the breathing rhythms change naturally. Allow them to be short, long, fast, slow, rough, or easy. Steady yourself by relaxing into the breath. When your breath becomes soft, let your attention become gentle and careful, as soft as the breath itself. As if you were training a puppy, you will gently bring yourself back 1,000 times. Over weeks and months of this practice, you will gradually calm and focus yourself using the breath. There will be many cycles in this process, stormy days alternating with clear days. Stay with it. As you do, you will find awareness of the breath, helping to steady and quiet your whole body and mind. From this initial mindfulness, you can meet the other experiences that arise with balance. You will be centered amidst your ever-changing life.